foundation that I started when I sold the winery, and one of the members of the foundation is a fellow from Earl Jones' son, Greg Jones. I don't think you know Greg Jones.
No.
He's a PhD climatologist. He lectures all around the world.
Huh.
And Greg's always telling us, you know, get an eel meat. He's in Portugal right now. He's been over there for like 6 months. And those guys over there are looking for new places to plant their vineyards because they're getting warmer temperatures all the time. So they're trying to go higher in elevation. And what do we have here? Cooler all the time. We're too cool, you know.
Yeah, one of the places we're planning to go is Okanagan Valley, BC, and they're on the other end of it too. They're actually buying land where they know they can plant in a couple of years. Too cold right now, but in a couple of years it'll be fine.
They're
so
hedging their bets, huh?
yeah. So it's an interesting dynamic. Well,
have you been up there?
We're planning a trip up there. Hopefully this harvest season, if we can make it. So
Stop by and see Hanley.
Hanley.
H-A-I-N-L-E. He's an interesting guy.
Write that down. So I guess my first official question is: you started out as an engineer. And what made you choose engineering early on?
Well, I can remember walking to kindergarten and looking up in the sky and seeing an airplane. I said, "What? That's really amazing! That, you know, it's something that you can fly around in." And that was probably 1939 or 40, something like that. And I was always interested in trains, you know, became like little kids, you know, but it never, as I grew up, it really didn't leave me. I mean, and then I got interested when I was in I went to the Boy Scouts, the whole program of merit badges, and pretty soon I was building a crystal set, and we lived in the Bay Area, and no matter how I tried to tune the crystal set, all I could hear was KGO, you know, because it was such a strong transmitter.
Yeah.
But I said, this is really fun, you know, I can climb under the covers and without any, you know, any additional outside sources listen to a radio station, you know. So I got interested in electronics that way, and that's got me into, you know, finally into engineering and design work, and as I grew up, and you know, and then I still like it. I mean, it's still, when things come out, I marvel at like how we got all that stuff in that camera. You know? Because when I left electronics at Tech, I worked at Tektronix, and when I left there, large-scale integration was just starting. And up until that point, we still worked with discrete things, you know, transistors that did this, and thyristors that did that. And so you pick the components, but now it's just like a systems engineer. Now you just buy a chip or something that has certain functionality, and you apply it.
So you go down this engineering path, and at some point your attention kind of turns to wine. Do you remember when that was? Was there sort of a
Oh moment? Yeah, very clearly. I was still working at Shell Development when my dad brought me a bottle of wine from a fellow that was given to him by a friend of his, and he thought it was pretty nice. And the family wasn't too much into wine at that point. And I thought, well, this is pretty nice stuff. So going to college, by the way, in the summertime I worked in a brewery because my dad worked there, and so I got to learn a little bit about fermentation sciences by being exposed to it. And living in the Bay Area, the Livermore Valley was nearby, Napa's nearby, all the wine growing regions are nearby. So this one particular wine came from Pleasanton, and it was from an old vineyard called Ruby Hill Vineyards. And so I went out there, and an old Italian fellow came from Sicily, and he rode out Prohibition and started a winery after Prohibition. And by the time I met him, though, this was like in 63 or so, he had sold, he still had the vineyards, but he wasn't making wine anymore. And the Christian brothers were buying all those grapes. And we got to be friends, and I would buy wine. He sold wine in 5-gallon jugs, you know, Zinfandel, really, you know, stuff that's been aged for like 7 years in large oak casks, and, you know, like for $2. Take it home and decant it and put it into smaller bottles. And so one thing led to another. I asked him in 1965 if he'd sell me some grapes, and he did. And so a friend and I picked about 800 pounds of Semillon on a Saturday morning, and that evening I was making wine.
How did that first wine turn out? Do you remember the?
It was decent, you know. I'm probably, at least by whatever my standards were then, you know. And it was, you know, and I had a mentor that, the fellow I found, acquainted myself with a fellow that started Berkeley East Labs, which later became Scott Labs. And he kind of took me under his wing and, you know, told me all the ins and outs of what was going on with fermentation science. And then at that point, I just was off running. I mean, you couldn't stop me. And then going back to Davis and taking classes and industry type things.
What do you think it was about that process of making that wine that really captured your imagination?
Well, I started to really got to liking wines, and I always tell people I really, you know, I'm a consumer before I'm a winemaker. I mean, I really like drinking wine. I think wine's a real civilized. To me, it's liquid food that you have with your meals, and so it just to me it was a total fulfillment of, you know, an intellectual thing of you have to know what's going on, and then the artistic thing of being able to remember tastes and flavors and blend things and you imagine how things will be as you process the wine. And so I'm very fortunate to find it, you know, that sort of thing to do with my life, because I was very happy in electronics, and but I'm happier, you know. It was better.
I read in I think a book, Paul Pintarch, I think.
Yeah, Paul, he just passed away, I heard.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's too bad. It's a great
He
book.
got some kind of illness or something. He was not something, because he wasn't that old.
Yeah, he wasn't. Like a 62 Bordeaux wine or something that you tried somewhere that was kind of a vivid memory. Do you recall that one?
Yeah, that's my wife and I. We went down to the restaurant called Nepenthe, where Orson Welles and what was it, Rita Hayworth? And then they would have dinner there. I think it's still there. It's a great restaurant. It's a circular thing. You look out over the Pacific, and we were celebrating, I think, our second anniversary or something. And so, you know, I had a bottle of 62 Pouilly. I can't remember the wine exactly now. Haute Canet. And so, and I thought it was just dynamite. And I can still remember those flavors. You know. It's one of those magical things. You know, the food was great, the setting was great, and the wine was great. You know.
Now, you were also interested in jazz kind of early on. What kind of influence on your life was jazz at that time, and even? Well,
before I got married, I lived in an apartment not too far from Berkeley on Telegraph Avenue, and across the street was a jazz bar, and called the Gold Nugget. And the guys that there would have their stereo systems going full blast and playing Stan Kenton and all the, you know, Cal Jader and all, and there was, you know, at that time Bay Area was fairly active in the jazz circles, you know, with all the names of the time. And so I had a deal with these guys. If I took care of their hi-fi stuff and kept it running for them, I could come and have all the drinks I wanted, and I didn't have to drive. All I did was walk across the street, you know. And so that's how I got That worked out fairly well too, so.
Yeah, it seems like a very pragmatic arrangement. So when did you first get the idea that you wanted to come, you've been, your family's in the Bay Area and you decided to leave and come up north. When did you first get the idea of coming up to Oregon?
Well, I have a good friend who exposed me to Pinot Noir in the Bay Area, and so I started exploring. This is after I made that first barrel of wine in 1965, and I got to exploring where do they grow Pinot in California. You have to know back in the 60s in California, people would say we can grow anything anywhere because we have plenty of sunshine and plenty of heat, which is true. You can grow most any variety at any place, but that doesn't necessarily make it best wine. It doesn't fit the variety of the climate. And Pinot there was not that successful, I don't think. But occasionally you get a really nice bottle, and I got a really nice bottle of an England of 1955. Well, so I got to find some place in California where I can grow these grapes. Well, the more I looked, it was got to be Anderson Valley or up in the mountains in Santa Cruz where it was cooler. And then since we lived in the Northwest when I was a kid growing up, I said, why not, what's wrong with Oregon? Why weren't people doing anything in Oregon? And when I was at the class at Davis in 1967, I was asking the instructor about it, the professor that I had at the time, well, did he know anything? And he said, he says, you don't have to look, there's a fellow right in the back of the room here in the class, is Richard Summers from Hillcrest. He was taking the same class I was taking. And so he gave me, and then I started talking to him about Oregon, and he lit up and said he was kind of like a lonesome dove up in Roseburg. And so he gave me a bottle of wine, and I just, as soon as I got home in Walnut Creek with it, I opened it up and poured some, and all I could smell was whiskey barrels, because he was putting the wine in freshly empty whiskey barrels, and I don't even think he was washing them out. And but I could tell there was some really nice fruit character behind all that whiskey smell. So, and then at the same time, I got an offer from Tektronix to come to work for them, and so I took the interview trip. I drove up in early October, did the interview, and by that time Dave Lett and Chuck Corey had been here just a couple of years before me, and they just had planted their vineyards. And Dave was out of town, but Chuck wasn't. So I spent like one night to 4 o'clock in the morning talking grapes and wine with him, and then drove back to California, and on the way stopped in Roseburg, stopped at Richard's Vineyard, and picked some fruit and stuffed it in the back of the trunk of the car and smuggled it into California, and made a small lots of wine in Walnut Creek, and then they were really good, I thought, anyhow. So that really sealed it for me that I had. And so it's like everything came together. I got a job here. I knew that the grapes could do well here, and so then that was in '67. Moved the family up in '68. Spent all of '68 looking for places to plant, the right exposure. We had a flying club at Tech, so we'd go up like maybe once a week in a Cessna 170 or something, and fly around and look at from the air from what looked on a geodetic survey map like a good spot, confirm it from the air. Then on a weekend, jump in the old Ford Falcon I had and drive around and start banging on doors and find out if there was any ground for sale. And that's how I found the first vineyard site over in Dock Road.
Did you have any sense at the time, kind of the scale of what you were with the kind of the other?
It would mature, evolve into what it had come to be. It's almost a $2 billion economic thing now for the state. I don't think we ever I think we never thought of failure. We saw one problem after another as just a challenge, just something to overcome, and we'll get there, and there were probably a lot of times would have been throw in the towel, and pack up the bag and head to California again. But I think we all went through that.
What were some of the toughest things that you faced during that time?
Well, my first vineyard I planted on that piece that I bought from Mrs. Dock was that young vines come up early in the spring because the root system isn't deep. So in the spring of 1970, on April the 6th, I think it had snowed, and the vines were already out. And then this snow kind of, scintillated away, and then open sky, and then I got frost, and the vines got all frosted to the ground. And so that's kind of discouraging. But they're pretty good survivors. So then the new shoot came up, and that was fine. Then at the end of that year, there were walnut orchards there before, and they were twig borers that were living in the walnut trees, but now the walnut trees were gone, and they said we got to get into something else, so they attacked the grapevines. And then, so they made all these holes into the little tiny shoots. Then the silver thaw came, and the ice loaded up on them, broke them off. So by the time you got the frost, you got the broken off vines. Plus the deer came in and mowed me to the ground. Drilled a well, which we were supposed to. I was going to be able to put a mobile home on the property, and that would be the water source, but it turned out to be a dry hole. So the things started mounting up, like, well, all these reasons you could see, was pack up and leave, but we didn't. So.
What kind of kept you going then, as during that time then? So what?
Well, I think pursuing a dream, and you just persevere. You just take it as another setback, but it's nothing. It's not an end all.
So what was the community like of these folks? You were all kind of doing the same thing. What was it spirit like when things were starting out between folks who were in a similar situation to you?
Well, we had, as we, there was a nucleus of us, maybe a dozen or so, and we would meet at the Tiger Fire Hall. They had a free public meeting room there. We would meet there like once a month, and we would just share our experiences and how we, where you get equipment, and we start talking about different clones of different things and where we're going to do this, and we did a lot of collaboration. And my dad's, if you knew my dad, he always had a lot to say. But one thing he always told me, he said, monkeys don't build fences around their coconut trees. So we ended up, we shared our coconut trees, and I think that really did a lot to get the wine industry up and running. We were able then to approach the legislature, and we got funds for OSU to do extension of small fruits and include great programs. And it's just, and I don't think any of us at that point were in it for the money. I mean, we just really wanted, we had a passion to make this a really great wine growing region.
Do you think that kind of collaborative spirit is still part of the industry today in Oregon?
I think I would hope so. I mean, there's so many players now. Over 400 wineries, I think. But I see the second, generation now getting into it, and I see collaboration amongst them. So, and you can. I mean, the wines that are on the market are really, I think, really pretty. It's hard to find a bad one.
What do you think of now? Coming out here, you were flying all over looking for vineyard sites, and now, just driving out here, we had every corner we turn around, there's a blue sign pointing to a world famous winemaker. Does that ever strike you as funny, or do you ever think of kind of the role that you've had in that as you go through there?
No. I mean, not me personally, I mean, I never thought that there would be blue signs down there. I mean, the first time we started selling wine was in, first vintage was 72, and I had, wasn't very, it was like 100 cases of Pinot Noir, 212 cases altogether. And there was Riesling and Gewürztraminer and Pinot Noir, so we just opened up the garage at the house and on weekends and, and sent out notices to people we knew and come on by and taste the wine. And we'd take a card table and set it to fold out the leg and set it down and pour a little wine. And, a bottle of wine was $5 or something. Thank you very much.
Do you ever kind of miss that kind of starting up mode or spirit that was kind of around at that point, or?
Maybe, I don't know. It's someone said the good old days are sometimes a product of a bad memory, So. That's one of the things I sort of like about the Arizona situation, because it's like Oregon 30 years ago down there, and so I can sort of live that over again. When I do spend time down there, I can get involved with the wineries being exposed to the press and publicity down there, and try to keep up the boost.
So you so it's kind of, you were very instrumental in helping to build a wine industry here, and you're interested in doing the same thing. Is there something in your personality or something that likes to look at something and can imagine what it could be or wants to build it up?
Well, I've always liked creating things, whether they be a photograph or a piece of electronic instrumentation or something. I like to be able to do that, and so I'm always thinking that way. What can I do? I've got some. I don't have the winery anymore, so I have. I've come full circle. I have down in one of my farm buildings here. I make wine every year, and but it's not. It's also. I mean, obviously, I want to drink it, but there's a purpose. I usually involves in some kind of experiment that I can do. I can now make small lots, like a barrel, and try something in the vineyard and see how it flows through in the wine. So, and I've got an experiment lined up for this year that I'm thinking about doing. So, and as long as I don't run out of imagination, I guess I'm all right.
What do you think you do without wine? What would
Without wine? That's sort of like the Dark Ages for me, I guess. I don't know, what did people do during the Dark Ages? They didn't have a lot of fun, did they?
So what's your favorite wine after all of your experiences? Do you have any wines that really stand out, that either that you've made or that you've experienced here in Oregon, or?
Well, they're like, if you have a bunch of kids, it's hard to pick a favorite. But some of the early vintages are still nice. I just had a bottle in 1980. A friend bought a bottle in 1980 for dinner like a month ago, and I didn't have any more of my own. I didn't have any in my cellar, but he did, and so the thing was 25 years old, and so we pulled a cork on it. It was beautiful. Just dynamite bottle of wine. And which kind of one of the hurdles we had to overcome in marketing Oregon wines. We finally got some acceptance that the wines were okay, and then the next, the volley that was thrown at you was like, well, they won't. How do we know they're going to age? So now we proved that. So. I think we're there.
In sort of this recognition that Oregon has achieved over the years, are there any particularly satisfying experiences that you had in that process as kind of the Oregon wines were being introduced to the world? Does anything stand out to where you really turned a corner, or Oregon wines really started to make an impact?
There are like two things I can recall that like you might call a defining moment. In 1977, I was fortunate enough to be with a gal in Burgundy who was setting up an exporting company, and she was going to the smaller producers to taste their wines, because back then, if you had to be in one of the big houses, otherwise you didn't get your wine shipped. The small producers, so you had no way to get to the American market. So I was able to taste wines in the cellars and taste wine out of the barrels, and I said, these wines are just, I've got this one back home in Oregon, so that was, that was a great endorsement or validation at that point that we were doing the right thing. And then the second time something like that happened was when Druon came to Oregon and put his winery in, and in 1988 he had a tasting at his new facility. He'd already had some wine made here, but then he brought it to the new facility, which is down the road from here. And I was standing next to Bill Fuller, the winemaker at Tualatin at the time, and we both tasted his wine. Noir. If I said, this stuff tasted like Burgundy, I'd go out and shoot myself, right? So he was making wines that were, that really reflected the terroir and the whole place. That's what's so neat about grapes, is that they really take on their surroundings and they manifest that comes through in the wine.
What are some of the qualities or aspects of wines from here that make them Oregon wines?
Well, I think the biggest thing that when I first started making wine, I got Richard Summers, actually, before my vineyards were producing, I got some grapes from him and brought them here. And the acidity levels here are much higher than what I've been used to in California. And I thought, well, this is going to be a big problem. And it turns out it's not a problem, it's an asset. The acidity is the backbone, like the skeleton that the fruit of the wine hangs onto, and provides that long, nice ageability. And when the wines are young, it provides the brightness that the wines have that you don't have as big, clumsy wines. So I think that's one thing that Oregon wines are, the cool growing conditions give you this wonderful balance between the acidity and fruit and flavor compounds.
What, starting a wine business from scratch probably put strains on, made challenges on you personally, like running a small business and things like that. What were some of the toughest things about building up basically an industry from scratch? Is there any challenges that you faced in the mix of all of that?
Well, it's the wine business, and vineyards and wineries are something that takes time to get enough cash flow to where you can start living like a human being again. Start out, I projected 7 years before cash flow was going to equal, out was going to equal in, and it actually took more like 11. And I was fortunate enough to have Cal Knudsen as a partner in the early years, because of his financial position, we could secure, we could guarantee loans. Or the wine industry was unknown here, and bankers were reluctant to lend you any money. So that was that was a great thing to me, have that ability to finance the growth of the winery.
You were in California near Napa and had been maybe a little familiar with the industry down there, and of course there's UC Davis program, and when you think of winemakers from Europe too that have been doing this for generations, what gave you the confidence that you could kind of step in and make a change kind of mid-career or early in your career and be successful and be competitive in that industry?
Well, I guess it's, I mean, we had early milestones where the wines were successful and accepted, and so that, you know, that we knew we were doing the right thing without, you know, even early, you know, the first vintage is 1972, was really good stuff. It wasn't bad stuff. So we knew we had a product there. And so the rest of it was just a matter of bringing along all the infrastructure you need to make it happen. We basically, I had a major trip in 1977, spent 6 weeks in Europe, and not only in wineries, but a lot of time in vineyards, and saw how they were growing grapes there, which is not the way we were taught at Davis, because it's a different climate in California. So I brought back and then stole, if you will, the training methods that they were using, and they're deployed throughout the state, and it's just learning one piece. You know, it's adding one little piece to the puzzle all the time, and pretty soon you have it complete.
Do you see, in your experience going to Europe and then coming back to the States, do you see any kind of differences in American winemakers or their approach from old world winemakers?
Well, I think back then the California industry, which was the American industry basically in the 60s, 70s, was led by larger producers. And smaller producers in California have come subsequent to that. And so everyone now is conscious of where you grow the grapes and how they're grown. Back then, not so much. I mean, I can remember talking to California people, winemakers, very competent winemakers, but they'd never been to the vineyard. They had not seen the grapes growing. And that's one thing that when you go to Europe, it's very closely knit. And I mean, the term wine growers is what we call ourselves, not winemaker. And we grow wine. See, it's like, it's a transition from the outside world of the vineyard to the inside world of the winery, but it's all one continuum. And you have to be on board for the whole trip.
That's something did that kind of coalesce from your experiences in Europe then, a little bit more?
You see that all the time, and they have schools in Europe where if you wanted to become a winemaker, the first thing you do is you would be assigned a row of grapes on some hillside to take care of. And you would see that whole row of grapes through its growth cycle. You would harvest the fruit off of that, and you take it into the classroom and make wine inside, and so which is the way you should do it. And now at Chemeketa here in Salem, you're doing exactly that.
What advice might you have for someone who's, you know, kind of at that point when you had that, was it Semillon grapes back when you were first starting out, and they get this idea that, oh, I want to get into the wine business, and they're just thinking about it. What advice would you have to someone just at that point?
Well, they need to understand it's a lot of hard work, and it's not a big romantic industry. I mean, it's very rewarding, and that you can. I mean, how many things can you do that you can actually sit down and drink it? You know, and like know, you can't drink my mistakes at making electronic circuits, right? You know, you can drink your mistakes here. But you have to really, all kidding aside, you really have to, I always tell people, if they've got the passion, never give up. You just don't give up. That's it.
What about folks like Todd down in Arizona who are looking at building an entire new region? What advice would you have for them about that whole problem of going to a place where the wines aren't known and grape growing isn't prevalent?
I kind of tell them the Oregon story, you know, I try to tell them, well, this is what we did, you know, back 30 years ago and how it went, and you were there, so you see some of his problems, and I remind him to don't give up. I mean, you know, it's and the wines are starting to show themselves. Keep working at it.
Where would you go now if you were going to be starting out in the wine business? Is there anything that really excites you if you were kind of where you were 40 years ago?
Well, you know, I'm fascinated by China. There's got to be somewhere in China that has good growing conditions, but I don't know where it is, you know. And you could probably spend a lot of time trying to find it too. And you know, they're not very keen on wine over there, but I think that'll change. And once the Chinese start drinking a lot of wine, then look out.
You think a new market for Oregon wine would open up?
You don't have to. You couldn't begin to have making up. Well, you know, that's the other thing here. We have the Willamette Valley. I think there's 100,000 acres here that could be vineyard ground. That's, you know, much larger than Napa or Sonoma, and that's, so maybe in the next 50 years we'll have a lot. We're up to what, 22,000 acres now.
So what would be your hopes for the industry here, and do you see any trouble ahead for the Willamette Valley?
Well, I think as the industry grows, the vineyards grow, we have to make sure that we work in with our local society, that you know, making the wine and growing the grapes is done in a compatible way with the other people that are existing around us and what they're doing. So, and I think we're doing a pretty good job of that.
You see any, I've talked to some folks that think prices are too high or it's growing too fast or anything like that, but do you see any problems, concerns in that area, or?
It's an agricultural business, and so we're at the whim of Mother Nature, which, you know, and you know, what kind of curveballs you're going to throw us this year. And so one year you can have hardly any grapes, and next year you have to look for a bathtub and put the extra fruit in, you know, or something. But that's all the cyclic nature of agriculture, though, and it's part of the game.
And finally, what's special about Pinot Noir? Why is that such a you know, what's unique about it? Why do people really go crazy about it? There's a lot of wine aficionados, but then there are people that love Pinot Noir more than anything.
Because it's so seductive. I mean, it's just a good bottle of Pinot. It just grabs you, and it has all that complexity. And it's good when it's young, and it's good when it's older. And you don't. It isn't. I mean, the classic example is you can be at a table with dinner with a bunch of people, and you can open a bottle of Pinot, a bottle of Cabernet, and the Cabernet, you know, people jump on it at first, you know, because it's fairly aggressive and good too, you know. in its own way. But by the end of the meal, the Pinot bottle is empty, and the Cabernet still has some in it.
Do you, I'm always curious too, did you notice a significant change after in the whole sideways kind of boom? Some folks have said that that was a kind of a turning point for popularity in Pinot.
A lot of wineries ended up selling, the smaller wineries, and then we experienced an increase in sales. And also, the other thing that it was the 60-minute program. I mean, it's got to be what now? Morty Savory had to be at least now 15 years ago, 20 years ago, where they looked into the why did the French paradox.
Oh, sure.
Eating all this, foie gras and cheese and drinking all this wine and only having 1/4 amount of heart disease. So they find that there's this synergism with wine and cheeses and things that actually are beneficial. And there's a lot of those studies are still going on.
Do you have wine still pretty with every meal or with dinner regularly? And
Oh yeah, a couple bottles behind me here ready to. There's always somebody that's lined up that wants to get drunk.
Well, let's see. I asked you I guess this is a good final question. Why does wine matter in people's lives? Just in general.
I think it's a great thing to have in the family when everyone can sit down around the table and relax and have all societies have some form of libation and the congeniality that it brings out and I think you should enjoy life so much more with wine on the table as opposed to no wine on the table. I can't imagine no wine on the table. Dark Ages again.